Good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 30th, and I'm going to just review what we did in class today for those of you who are absent. So we were in Populations and Resources, lesson 2.2, and basically the kids first of all started out with a warm-up, just kind of helping them to kind of remember, because it's been a day, help them to remember the article packet that they read, and answer this question: what do organisms need in order to reproduce? And of course the answer is they need ESMs in order to reproduce. So we spent a minute talking about energy storage molecules, or ESMs, and they are a molecule that organisms can use to release the energy they need to survive. And just a reminder, the three ESMs are fat, starch, and glucose, and we'll talk about them a little bit more later on. We've got several key concepts today. I think I've got 3 key concepts. So I'm going to have you pause the video and write this one down. Key concept number 5, organisms need to release energy from ESMs in order to reproduce. Pause the video, write that down, and then you can continue. Okay, so I had the kids open the sim from their home page, and I would love for you guys to do this. When you open up the sim, open up this populations, just the 3 populations one here, the middle one. And what you're going to see is make sure that you've got the show ESMs toggle switch on. And you're going to see that they have this, it's like a battery kind of, but this orange cylinder that's underneath each one of the organisms. And I had the kids just pick one organism and follow it around to see what happened. And what you should see is that the canister, when it's eating, the energy storage molecules will increase. And then as soon as it stops eating, if it starts moving around, if it's whatever, if it's reproducing, if it's whatever it is, the energy decreases. And in fact, when it's reproducing, it decreases a lot. And then right here, you can see on this screen, I have one fur bill that its energy storage molecule is gone. There's nothing there. There's another one over here, a little wee bug. And what we would see if we clicked on that the organism is dying. So if you don't have any energy storage molecules, you will die. We talked about energy storage molecules being starch and glucose. These are called carbohydrates. And then, of course, fats. And this is what the molecule looks like. So it's that repeating group of atoms in starch, glucose, and a fat molecule. Let's see. We had a yeast experiment. So the kids had sugar, they had yeast, and they had 3 cups labeled A, B, and C. And what they did is we talked a little bit about sugar being a type of glucose, and so it's an energy storage molecule. And so we had different amounts of sugar put in each one of the cups, and we were making a hypothesis as to which cup then would the yeast reproduce more quickly, or reproduce more, I guess. So in cup A, we didn't have any sugar. In cup B, we just put a pinch of sugar. In cup C, they put a tablespoon of sugar. And a couple kids thought that cup B would reproduce more because it's just enough sugar, and cup C would be too much sugar, so they wouldn't really need that much. And some kids predicted that cup C would actually reproduce more because it had more ESMs in order to reproduce. So what happened then is in those cups, cup A didn't have any sugar, cup B had just a pinch, cup C had a teaspoon of sugar. We put 1 tablespoon of yeast, and yeast is what we use to make bread. And if you would take a look at yeast, I had the kids put it in their hand and look at it. They're like little grains, and they look like kind of like grains of sand. They've got this hard shell. And so each one of those little grains contains some yeast, and they are single-celled organisms. And so they put 1 tablespoon of yeast and 40 milliliters of hot water. I need to add that right there. 40 milliliters of hot water into each cup. We don't want boiling water because that can kill the yeast, but it has to be pretty warm. And then we stirred it with a wooden spoon just until the yeast was wet. And then we left everything alone, pushed it off to the end of the table, and we just kind of wanted to give the yeast some time to reproduce. So during that time, we did a second read, and honestly, this was just a time filler, so I'm not going to really take you through this. we're going to come back to our, I think we've got 2 vocab words and a key concept. So consumer population, we pulled that out of the article the other day. I had you guys write that in the margin, so this should be familiar to you. Consumer population is a population that eats organisms from another population, and that is obviously the predator. A resource population is a population that is eaten by organisms from another population, and that is also known as the prey. And we have one key concept, so I'm going to have you pause the video and write this down. Key concept number 6, organisms in consumer populations get ESMs from eating organisms in resource populations. Go ahead and pause the video and write that down. Okay, so by this time, like maybe 15 minutes passed, there's plenty of time for the yeast to rise. And we took a look at it, and this is a picture I took from last year, and this is pretty typical of what we would see. So cup A, that didn't have any sugar, did not reproduce as much. Cup B was pretty close to A, and then cup C, there was a lot of reproduction. Now what the kids are seeing is actually bubbles. This is not all yeast. What happens is the yeast in cup C, it appears to grow the most because they produce the most bubbles. The bubbles that you see here are carbon dioxide, and that's from a process called cellular respiration, and that occurs when reproduction occurs. And so we can kind of assume that if there were a lot of bubbles, then the reason why is because there was a lot of reproduction. But we technically don't have evidence that they reproduce because yeast is a microscopic organism. We can't see it. So I've showed the kids this picture. It's an image that was taken through a microscope, and it shows yeast reproducing. And single-celled organisms reproduce in a variety of ways. Yeast happens to reproduce by budding. So if you look carefully, you'll see these little dots on here. Those are starting to be new yeast cells, and they are growing on the cell of an existing yeast. And as it grows, it buds. So it goes like this, and then it's going to break off and become new cells. So scientists have observed that when yeast gets more energy storage molecules, they can make more buds. So that means that they can reproduce more. So the idea was that cup C had more sugar, it had more ESMs, and therefore that's why the yeast was able to produce more in cup C. Last key concept number 7, the more energy storage molecules or ESMs available to a population, the more the organisms in that population can reproduce. Makes total sense. If there's a lot of ESMs, there's going to be a lot of reproduction. If there's not a lot of ESMs, then the organisms can't get the energy that they need to reproduce. So go ahead and pause the video and write down key concept number 7. Okay, the last thing is I'm assigned homework today. I hardly ever do this, but this is a really good one, so I want them to do it. It's activity number 5. So we're in lesson 2.2, activity number 5, and you're going to watch a video about an experiment in which scientists gave crickets different amounts of sugar and then observe the effects on the crickets' reproduction. There is a box in your homework on Amplify where you can write down the answers to the questions. Make sure that you do that and then turn that in, okay? All right, you guys, hope to see you tomorrow.